Building the Cyclops body.
This video kind of shows the basic steps that I go through to make the body for the Cyclops. In case you decide you want to make one. I've got patterns. I've made enough Cyclopses that I've got patterns now of the different panels that I need to cut out. This one right here, this is a side panel. Now, there's no doors on this version because this is going to be the lightweight version that I may run out at Bonneville sometime later if I get out there again. But, so we'll make two of these. These are the side panels. This one right here, this is the front. Pretty much just kind of put that one together just yesterday. This is the top panel. This is the trunk lid. There's a couple side panels. These are one for the back windshield and one for the front windshield. The back's a little big, a little smaller. So that's some panels to get started. So what I need to do is I've got my sheet of steel. This is a 4-foot by 10-foot steel. Now all I got to do is drag that out. We can start locating these to get the best material so we don't have as much waste out of it. Here I have a side panel that I just welded up. It's kind of getting ready to just do some trimming. The tubes kind of stretch out a little bit longer on the sides, but notice it's got the shape we need. So now let me get into explaining how I did this. This is my fixture. It's all chopped up because normally I make them with doors. But this one's going to be solid panels because I'm trying to keep the weight as low as I can. You notice it has the radius, the top radius there, and I've got spacing behind here. This is plywood, 1/2 inch, spaced a little bit further out. That because I use a 1/2 inch OD tubing. McMaster cars normally where I get these 6-foot tubes. So what I'll be doing is I'll take and I'll bend the tube along the radius here, and I've got 1/4 inch bolts is what I end up doing. I got 3 holes here. So as I bend, I stick these in and it'll locate the tubing as we go along. And then once I get the tubing in place, then I come back with my side panel and I'll locate it and get it nice and centered where I want it. Clamp it on both ends, then I'll flip the fixture down, come back and I'll weld on the back side on both sides that'll hold it in place. I came back and cut the tubing, the excess off, So we only have a little bit. Then this is one of the edges here. Came back with my banjo grinder and ground it. Try to keep a nice smooth flow on the front and back for when we put our panels on. Our plywood panel, which I cut from a 4x8 sheet, I cut it down so it's 38 inches wide, 48 inches long. I've got it set up on, right now, either 4x4s or 4x6s, just to keep the whole thing off the ground. When I put the side panels on and screw them in place, that'll keep them nice and lined up right with the bottom of this plywood panel. I also put a couple cans of paint to give a little more extra weight to make sure that I am down on these 4x4s and 4x6s in the middle. Get by with what you can, simple tools. There's my roller system. Steel tube with a couple pieces of wood to keep it off the ground. That lets you slide your metal in underneath it. And I'll show you what I do on the bending. Now this is our front panel we were talking about. Slide it in place, step on it, do just a little bend at a time. Slide a little more, try to keep it even, little bend at a time. You aren't being rushed, so you just take your time with it. Because if you bend too much at one time, you'll get like a little crease. You don't want to do that. That may work out. Now our next step, we're going to mount the front panel just by running a few screws in the bottom, maybe only about 3, one in the middle and a couple on the sides. Line up the outside and just shoot the screws, and that should at least hold it in a vertical position. My next step, I'm going to come in with my knee, press on a piece of wood so I can get real good contact with our radius coming along the side. Then I'm just going to tack weld a few places just to hold it. Now for the top, I think I'm going to take a couple clamps and clamp them on to get them real good and fastened onto the tubing. Now I have my top and bottom panels, tops welded in, and I screwed in the bottom panels like I did the side. and went ahead and kind of welded them in place. Now I'm going to end up putting a strip down on each side. Normally I use maybe an inch to 1.25 inches wide by 1/8. Well, to keep the weight down, I'm only going by half inch by 1/8 on this. And what I ended up doing is I cut to the length I needed. Then I'll come back and we have the curvature. We want to kind of match the curvature. So I'll lay it up here and kind of line it up and say, okay, right about here is where we start curving. Now, use my same homemade fixture here. And you just line it up where you want to start curving. And just work it. Keep working it in. And yeah, it worked out pretty good. I ended up, the one piece I already have. So now I'll just work on this other one and get ready to clamp it in. That's one side tacked in place. Now go to the other one. We have our roof panel, and we're going to end up putting a bend in it and stuff. Using the homemade roller again. Now you don't need to get the curvature identical to what's on the Cyclops, but you want to get a little bit of curvature in the piece of metal, because once you clamp it down and stuff, it'll hold its shape. So we do the same thing. And you want to go slow with it and stuff, because you just work it nice and easy, because if you bend it real sharp, then you won't get a nice curvature. But just with the homemade roller, you can get pretty decent shape. Now the roof panel is probably the hardest one to fit in. What I ended up doing, I've got a couple pieces of wood that I put together and kind of clamped in there, 38 inches wide. So did that in the front and the back to maintain the spread of the roof. And then what I ended up doing is I've got a piece of wood clamped on the outside there, and I had to go back and actually trim the roof panel again on width wise, because what you just want it to kind of sit like it is there, so it isn't above and it isn't below. It just kind of slides underneath this piece of wood, and then I clamped that to the piece of wood going on the top there. See that. What I ended up doing, I measured up the 17 inches, which is a nice roof height there, and then put the first panel in place, or the first piece of wood, or spreader. Clamped it. Now what you end up doing is you kind of line up down through there and say, okay, this looks pretty parallel. We aren't going to one side or the other. It may end up being that you're off a little bit in front here, but that'll be okay, because you won't notice it that much. So the game plan right now is I got it clamped in place, at least right at the front here. So I'll tack it on both sides like that, and then work my way back. There it is. It's in place. At least tacked in place. Kind of gonna put these little side pieces in. What I end up doing is they're so flexible, they're so thin, you can actually put a little bit of curvature into them yourself, like this. Now what we end up doing, I put a piece of steel here, leave a little gap, and we're going to come back and tack it some places to hold it, and then remove the steel. But what I want to do is kind of line it up similar to what we did with the roof. I come back and I'll put a piece of wood across and clamp it just like I did the roof, and work my way down to the bottom here. Now with this lower end, it overhangs and stuff. And what I end up doing, I'll come back and mark a little bit above the edge of the steel right here. Use my Dremel, I'll cut it off, and then I come back with a steel plate like I did on top and tack it in place. But pretty much, that's one in place. Now all I got to do is 3 more. Well, I unscrewed it, the screws at the bottom, and flipped the body over, upside down like this. Because these were all just tack welds on the outside. So now, when you flip it over, you can do some nice straight down welding to get the inside and get the regular welds. Now once we do that, we'll come back and grind the other ones. So yeah, object is to weld it, but don't concentrate the heat because we don't want to warp it. So you can I'm going to jump all over the place, just doing a little here, down this end, just to get the welds. So see how this goes.
Now it's time to flip it over, trim, and locate all your other components. If you want more information on panel sizes and more components to build your own Cyclops, you can pick up my book from Amazon.